Good evening and welcome to the July 22nd meeting of the Comprehensive Plan. This evening we'll be going through our agenda. We don't have any guests before us, but we will first do a recap of our site visits. The committee did a tour on the 13th, looked at a couple of properties. We'll recap those for the members that were not there can get up to speed on those, and we can have additional conversation. We'd sent out some updated draft sections. Sustainability was this last one, have some conversation on that. And then finally look to schedule our next couple of meetings just to kind of get those on the calendar. So with that, I'll turn it over to Doug. We'll go back around what we looked at last week. We'd received 3 different requests leading into last week's meeting that we went out and took a look at with our site tour. The first was down on Penfield Road. I think it's 2222 Penfield Road, 2226.
2218, 24, and 26.
Yep. So this is property we had request that is currently zoned LB, that is requested to be rezoned to GB or general business. They were before the town board the following week right after us, or the Wednesday night, or on the 14th. The town board obviously heard their request, tabled it for further discussion from this committee, as well as feedback from the PRC, the Project Review Committee. So as Doug's pulling up, does show the four corners, the four corners of 250 and 441. So the area that had requested, Doug has highlighted on the east side. So 250, to orient people, 250 is running north-south, 441's east-west. The pink-colored lighter area is zoned general business. The yellow area is zoned limited business, which is a step down from the general business. MR is in purple, and then I believe it's PD is in the darker blue color. So Doug has highlighted the 3 colors in a light blue that had requested rezoning. As part of that, we drove to the back. We looked at the property to the east, which is the Popley property, which is limited business. We looked at what was the former Labella Day Spa, as well as the urgent care facility in the front. And then obviously looked across at that's the Smile Center. Dr. Sannon's property is the other remaining LB piece in kind of that block. And then you've got Tim Hortons to the east, and then it's a vacant property, which is still zoned commercial to the east of that. So I think that was in the rainy part of our drive. We didn't hop out at that one, kind of looked out, did a windshield tour. But we had mapping ahead of time that the group looked at, had some initial conversations there. Don't know if the committee's had further thoughts, discussion items you want to bring back up tonight. I know Doug's pulling up kind of some more Google Street View images of that, but with that, I'll put it back to the committee for open conversation.
I think one of the conclusions that both of us in the band came to when we were kind of looking, because there is residential behind that tour, I guess that's to the east, that if this is to be rezoned, a strip of limited business should be left as a buffer between the general business and the residential to sort of cushion, cushion the blow of having potentially a car wash there.
And they did share that with the town board on Wednesday night. They had a concept sketch. I say concept, it was just kind of an overlay of what they were looking to do, but that would be on the urgent care property. Obviously, they need to get rezoned first and then site plan, and there's many more steps to that, whether the town board even would want to entertain rezoning to GB or, a car wash. But that was some of our conversation, as I recall, but just want to make sure that the committee was in that, and that's some of what we talked about at PRC as well, as our group is one. You can't solely rezone the one owner's property, so you'd need, there'd be spot zoning. It is touching GB, so, there is connectivity to it, but as we talked, I think you need to have, or he needs to have a conversation with the Smile Center next door and see what Dr. Sannon's thoughts are, but to leave a limited business standalone piece in the middle with GB all around it, wouldn't make a whole lot of sense either. So I think our recommendation out of that was to have Dr. H, talk to him, see what his thoughts are, come back as a collective group to say, the both of us, propose to be rezoned, and then, based on conversation or whether support of this group, and then, further conversation with the town board. But that's kind of where PRC left it. We've got, say, many concerns about car wash, whether all of them can be mitigated by site plan layout and turning and noise and everything else, but, looking at it at a very concept level, it's a little bit hard to get into too much detail.
I think the PRC also agreed with you that there should be some kind of a buffer adjacent to the residential properties to the north to keep that third parcel possibly as limited business to act as the buffer.
Any other thoughts, comments, concerns on?
No, Donna covered pretty much where we were
covered
as a
it.
group in the van, yeah.
Just, again, want to capture it in a public format, obviously we had some conversations there, but just want to make sure, one, we recap that, in the public setting, and then, see if there's a consensus amongst the group to support a rezoning of at least that, I'll say smaller block, but, keeping an LB strip with those 3 properties on the east, and then support of rezoning those, I guess it'd be 4 other properties from LB to GB.
Yeah, that would be.
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
So I gotta abstain, I guess.
If you feel comfortable, you're welcome to weigh in. If you don't, want, obviously, as we've done before, this group, votes on consensus. So if we've got the majority, as we share with our, comments to the board, was a consensus of the group that, there was support for it. If you'd like to abstain, you can abstain. If you'd like to weigh in, you're familiar with it enough, you can weigh in if
Yeah, I guess
that's your
what
choice.
would concern me would be the traffic that would be created, especially if it was a heavy use like a car wash.
You gotta pull your mic
Oh.
over a little bit so they can, or you can pull it over. It's
Yeah.
flexible. Just grab there you go.
I guess what would concern me would be the impact of the traffic if it was a intense use like a car wash.
And I think we can put those comments to the board as we've done on other situations, and I think we'll have conversations later this evening about, we've had requests for rezoning other locations, and part of this group's comment, and we'll rehash those, was about concern about the height. So I think that could be part of it is, yes, we look at GB, but obviously, traffic concerns and whether a car wash makes sense or not. It's a conditionally permitted use under the general business zoning. So it's not a straight permitted use. The board, whatever has jurisdiction, would have to look at, obviously, traffic impacts, lighting impacts, noise impacts to neighbors, and, just because it is rezoned to GB doesn't, guarantee that it could be a car wash, but he's been struggling. He has office space, he's got a medical spot. He said he's been trying to, get it repurposed for the past year, has been unable to get anybody in there, so that's why he's before the board asking for general business. Whether that means car wash or not,
Yeah, I think
that can remain
for our perspective is, do we believe that the parcels would be suitable to be used for general business? The town and the board will take a look at any individual request to determine, down the road. I mean, the traffic certainly would be a valid concern, but my understanding is that when something like that comes before the board, they're gonna do a traffic study. They're not gonna do a snap judgment on anything they would put there.
Yeah.
So,
And I think there's good cross-access through there, which we've done through the Luamp area. So connectivity through the plaza, connectivity through other areas, so that helps disperse the traffic, rather than just having it focused at one location. Okay. So everybody, I see 4 heads
Yep.
nodding yes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
5?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll make that recommendation with, caveats for concern for traffic. But the overall consensus of the committee is to support general business for this location. You're following our path of travel.
Yep, I figured it's the easiest way.
So the next property we visited was off of, well, Northrop Road, west of 250, south of Plank. So we met Gary Smith on the property. He owns landscaping place on the south side. We pulled in there first, kind of took a look at his property and the fields that were there. His request was for a 1 acre zoning, currently his RA2, so that's a 2 acre zoning. His comment question was, there was just a tree line, and they said, well, this side is 2 acre, this side is 1 acre, 1 acre to the west, 2 acre to the east. So as part of his property, he was requesting that, he would also be rezoned to a 1 acre zoning for that. Said he has no current plans for the lower piece. As Doug has highlighted, there is an exception parcel on the east side. That's the Amon property, which is owned by the town. We have a little parking area there and kind of a trailhead. People can walk that piece. The other property to the north is privately owned and is not part of Mr. Smith's holdings. Something we probably should look at as well. So again, you don't leave a parcel out, but that was his request, was kind of that lower block. We looked across the field, hopped out, walked around, then we drove to the north side. He bought what was the former Curran property. We pulled into that area, took a walk and look around there. That area, he requested, if there's accessibility to sewers with the Rocco Pines development that's happening currently, he requested, half acre zoning in that area, if it could be serviced by sewers. But again, he said he has no current plans. He doesn't have anybody lined up for it. But he said, knowing that we're going through this process, he, as he's spoken to us and spoken to Jim Costello, said, now is the time to, have those conversations, have us come out and take a look and, take a walk around his property. Again, thoughts, comments, concerns?
I have a concern. I have no problem with him having consistent 1 acre zoning on his land. I think that's entirely sensible. But the zoning down to the half acre lots, I mean, one of the things that we will be talking about tonight in our sustainability section, and that we have talked about in other contexts here, is that a feature of our town, which isn't necessarily a forward-thinking sort of feature, is the preponderance of homes, independent homes on half-acre zoned lots. That's not if you're really looking way down the road, that's not really a very sustainable model for a community. So I am reluctant, based on those things, and also based on the fact that he said he has no future immediate plans for that chunk of land, that we leave that as is for now. And I don't mean it in the sense of, well, we're just going to kick the can down the road to some other group, but that I think that unless there is a need that can be shown to be present and urgent, that we don't do that with that land.
So Don, are you talking about recommending that it be all 1 acre, the entire? So
Yeah.
that parcel as well as the other parcels, be all just 1 acre? Because what is that zone now, 2 acre?
The lighter green is 2 acres, so that's
Yeah.
kind of the lighter green to the east or to the right-hand side is 2 acre. The darker green is 1 acre to
Yeah,
the
but
west.
the plots that he showed us, the one further up towards the north, right? That's the one that they want to go with a half acre to be able to leverage the sewer that could be going in. And what Don is saying is, I just want to interpret it properly, we would agree that 1 acre across the board would be fine, but we wouldn't recommend that one small parcel in the north going to a half acre.
Well, that's what I would recommend, George.
Well, no,
but
I just want to be
I'm
clear.
not trying to speak for anybody else, but if there was some urgency to that, if he had sort of a personal sort of urgency, or if the entire sort of land use plan up in that area was kind of different from what it is, I would possibly feel differently. But I would say 1 acre across the board would make sense to me.
So if we talk about half acre the developments that are going in now, most of the developments that we're seeing now, I guess my question would be is if you put that stipulation, is that limiting to developers that would want to maximize the use of the land? So in other words, if we do that, how much of a challenge is he going to have, or a developer going to have down the road if they legitimately want to use that sewer and it could sustain half-acre lots? We've tied their hands, and they're going to have to come back and go through the same process that they're doing now.
It would be a little bit more challenging, but there is a way to leverage, still have smaller lots. If they were concerned that 1 acre was going to be more difficult to develop, even in the 1 acre zoning district, they could use what's known as Town Law 278 to cluster, essentially pull it smaller and do smaller lots. They wouldn't get as many
Doug,
as
could you pull
half-acre.
up, Rocco
That
Pines?
still requires that they have the set-aside around, so that they're still technically, the total acreage is 1 acre. I'm saying if that property could sustain 35 homes at a half acre, and 15 or 16 homes at 1 acre, are we limiting the advantages? Are we limiting the options for a developer who would want to develop the land if it could sustain really 36 homes?
Well, if you look
I don't
at,
think we necessarily want to encourage development on the east side of 250. That's in our,
This is still on the west side of
well,
250.
isn't that in our comprehensive plan, though, a vision to keep agriculture and keep open space? So why do
Well,
we want to encourage?
Again, this is west of 250.
Well-
I mean, most of east of 250, that's kind of been the running plan so far.
Yeah,
but this is-
I understood this to be on the west of 250, so that's why I'm having the conversation, because I completely agree that anything that's east should remain, with the 2 acre layout that we've talked about.
so if you look at the map Doug has brought up, this is the property immediately adjacent to the ones that we're discussing. That is a 1 acre zoning district, and anybody building in a 1 acre zoning district these days with sanitary sewers is using Town Law 278. And you can see the benefit of Town Law 278, where they're preserving a lot of open space, particularly along the roadways, so you don't see a lot of development along the roadway. This is the same thing that he would encounter. He would not be building lots on 1 acre of property. He would be, combining those into a Town Law 278 cluster. He would have some green space left over, which may not become town property, but it would be open space. So right now, he's got 2 acres. You're giving him that much more than what he has now. And in essence, there's no other R120 zone out there, so it'd almost be construed as spot zoning if you were to do it with higher density than that.
That comment makes the most sense to me.
So I think
acquiesce
Don is
that-
right on target
I
with it.
acquiesce that you've answered the question. I think 1 acre across that would work. I just wanted to look through the lens of a developer and kind of take a look at it. You don't want to single thread this, just toss the hammer down. So,
Right.
okay.
Maybe we should also look at the lens through the people that,
That
the
own that land.
traffic congestion we're having by supporting all these cluster developments. I don't think we have to acquiesce to developers. I think, we have as is pointed out in several points here in the master plan, there's a reason why people move out to Penfield. It's the open space.
Well, with
So-
respect to the cluster development, that does not give you any more density than what you would have if you just developed each lot on 1 acre parcel. You're,
The
in this
houses
case,
are like 10 feet apart on that.
well, yeah, but it's
So-
not more than what they would do if they were.
No, I understand, but-
That's the issue. It's not an increase in density, and that's why we're looking at 1 versus half.
It's an increase in density in that per square foot for that area where you're allowing.
But it's not
clusters.
per lot. And the essence was, if you were to develop that as 1 acre development, just flat out 1 acre per parcel, there'd be no open space or green space left over per lot. It would just be the house on the lot, and that would be all.
But it's
grass.
pretty safe to assume that no developer is going to develop at 1 acre lots because they won't make any
Oh,
money.
they
Oh,
do.
no,
I mean,
they'll
we
develop
have them
1 acre
on
lots.
2 acre
They're-
lots.
they're still
Sweetview-
relatively popular.
Sweetview Corners is a 2 acre development.
Well, we've actually got somebody right now looking at 2 acre developments out in
Right.
East Penfield, and they're looking at multiple homes. So it seems like
Yeah.
there's.
They'll do it. They have
there's
to be
a-
on septic to
there's a
do it,
market
but
for-
they'll do
yeah,
it.
For everybody, but.
So I think if we, again, if we say, okay, are we as a group comfortable that the 1 acre, do you have any concerns around it being rezoned to 1 acre lots?
I'd like to keep it the way it is. So yes.
Okay.
No, I think what we have to consider, and I'm going to ask Mark and Jim and Doug about this, though, that the owner of this land, Gary Smith, I mean, I don't care if any developer makes a dime. What I care about is the property owner who may be looking at this as his retirement and so forth. I worry more about that person and the revenue coming in from this. But I still feel strongly that 1 acre makes sense and that cluster zoning is the best approach to that balance of development and green space, and it will give them twice the opportunity if that land does get developed. However, I think he is within his rights to come back at a future point and say, okay, 1 acre's not going to work for me, can I get half-acre zoning? And maybe at some point in the future, that will be reasonable for that area. So he could come back if he chose to, right?
Right. Anybody can do that at any time, but again, you have to look at the comprehensive plan recommendations to make sure that we're being consistent
Right.
and not just
And what the
going
general
off the
zoning
rails.
is in the area. I mean, and we're not just going to throw an R120 in the middle, surrounded on all sides by
Right.
2 acre
Right.
zoning.
Yeah, just one
That goes
It's
back to your
not in
comment.
context
Right.
with the land around it.
Can you pull up if there's any wetlands, the EPOD stuff? Roland was just asking if there's any environmental concerns in this area.
But my point is, we're not restricting Mr. Smith from doing what he wants to do in the future. If he wants to try to pursue a different course of action,
As Jim
he's,
said, you can always come in
he's free
and
to
ask
do so.
again.
Yeah, from my perspective, since he has no plans to do anything with the property now, and it's a future thing, why wouldn't we make it 1 acre to make it consistent
right.
and let him come back if he chooses to do something in the future and repetition to have it changed?
Yeah, his request for an exception for that one parcel, you're right, at this point doesn't make sense because there's no plans on the table to even address it, so.
So Roland, to your question, it's hard to see a little bit. Where Doug is highlighting right now, that is actually the Amen property. So that was property that was donated to the town, so we own that. That's, say, the most encumbered. That's got some wetland, it's got some floodplain. And then the blue shows basically a buffer area around a stream. So we've got a stream corridor that goes through there. The other area just to the north of that is a private property. And then you can see there's a little bit of wetland on that north end, so it kind of runs along that 250 corridors.
There's both.
The
So
state is the
it's-
light blue line with a dark blue buffer.
And
Again,
it's hard
kinda
to see on,
it's in the
it's
bigger
harder
one.
to see on the screen.
And then the light green is the federal. And then that orange blip you see down below, I believe, is the floodplain in that area.
Yep, orange is floodplain.
There it highlights a little bit more, so you can see the hatched areas, the state wetland with the buffer. Again, these are approximate. Anytime anybody would do a development, they go out and delineate it. This just kind of gives us an idea or an indication there may be some environmental.
So that subdivision plan was actually for the properties right here, 1390 and 1440, which is sort of what's spurring this on. As part of that development, they're bringing in a regional pump station, which will add some capacity for the north side of his properties.
That was just a reference to kind of show how.
And his neighbors.
how
He's not the only one
278 can
requesting
be
this
used to-
rezoning. Several of his neighbors have asked for it as well.
The 278 won't gain you more lots, but it showed how you can kind of keep some buffers and keep some of the trees and.
I would have no problems with a 1 acre development with the 278 zoning cluster development in this case.
Sounds like we've got 1, 2, 3 supporting. Harold, yes.
Yeah, I support the 1 acre.
Chris is yes, and we got a no from Charles. So we'll convey that, the consensus is, obviously it's not unanimous, but we'll convey the consensus to the town board to go with 1 acre over that block. And I assume, while not asked, we'll consider and talk to the one exception parcel. I think it makes sense to square out that block as 1 acre, not just leave that one other neighbor. They've got a lot of environmental stuff in their property, so I don't see a lot of development potential, but
Does your
we'll reach out to them.
zoning, include any incentives, open space incentives too in this area?
We don't have, not like Pittsford. I know Pittsford is, you donate 50%, you get more density.
We
And
have rural residential with open space incentives, several factors.
We don't have
No.
incentives just
We had any-
straightforward for that, but typically with a 278, we make them do a conventional layout to
Right.
show how it meets the 1 acre without any rezoning, or any, excuse me, any variances, accepting out wetlands, accepting out stream, all of that. They gotta show what they can gain, and then from there, they can then cluster, and then hopefully.
Essentially showing hardship,
Preserves
if you will.
Conventional
Yeah.
plan for Rocco Pines. So
Thank
we'll
you.
show you the conventional plan for Rocco Pines. When it first came in, they had to demonstrate that they could get 72 lots on the site. And again, we don't allow development within wetlands and buffers and that kind of stuff other than yards. Certainly no physical development to speak of. But it shows that the entire property is actually being developed out. So, I mean, you know, you have no green space to speak of other than along that corridor area where they put their pond in versus the use of Town Law 278 where we got.
Is oriented
several
sideways a little
acres.
bit, but just
Oh, yeah.
Plank Road is on your right, Jackson Road's on the top of the screen, just to kind of
Yeah, it's skewed.
turn your head a little bit of what we were looking at with the other plan, but as Jim had said, they kind of show that they could fit the same, this is how they established their densities. They show that they could fit 72 homes on there, but through this, they don't preserve any trees, they don't preserve, you know, any buffer areas, they don't, you know, preserve much of anything. They have to keep the wetlands as they are, and they're not showing they're taking the wetlands out. They still got to show their ponds and their treatment areas and everything else, road right-of-ways, but in looking at that, the planning board said, okay, you can establish 72 lots, but we like the cluster plan better that showed you're still preserving the trees, give more buffer around the wetland areas, pull the houses in off the road, so it's more of a contained development. There's not any homes here that shows frontage houses along Jackson and Plank the entire length.
More often than not, that's always more of a win-win situation than
Yeah.
a standard conventional.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Can you show the?
And that's the majority of the
278?
applications we see go with
Yeah.
that. It's less infrastructure for the developer. It's less infrastructure for the town to maintain in the long run. You can see the number of, in length of
That
the
was an
roads
older
we'd
one.
have to plow and maintain. This shows, you know, much, let's say a denser development. The homes are closer together, but it's the same number. The number didn't change, but you can see the amount of trees that are preserved, the areas around the wetland and the stream
You
that are
have more,
protected. and-
more control over environmental
Doug, do you have the
features and the
percentage of
preservation.
acreage that's preserved?
Let's see, I'll pull up the one that was actually, because this is the cluster they proposed during the sketch plan. They did modify the layout, but it was the same number count in their final one. Site data. So for at least section one, it was 44% of the property was going to be under either town ownership or deed restrictions, conservation easements.
So going back to your recommendation for a minute, I thought I heard, or at least I interpreted, that you were okay with the 1 acre, but you were also encouraging the use of Town Law 278
I
for that
was,
area?
yes.
To be consistent with what's
Yes.
happening at Rocco
Yeah.
Pines as well?
Yes.
Okay. So
Definitely.
I want to make sure we get that into the memo,
Okay.
which
So
we'll share with you before we send to the town board.
It's the only way you can make something like that cost-effective.
Okay. So, stop number 3, one property in a review, we stopped in 2 different locations. So we had a request from a property on Empire Boulevard. This group looked at it early on in our review process, and this was initially a recommendation for limited business. It is along Empire Boulevard. Currently, it is in R120, so basically that's half-acre zoning in our world. So it's currently a
Actually, I think
half-acre
it's
residential.
R112.
R112.
Yeah, it's
I think.
Yeah.
So even, so 30-acre lots or quarter-acre lots. So it's an R112 residential zoning right now. Used to be the Hilltop Market, Jim?
Yes.
Obviously, it is not that any longer. We had an original request for this. This group recommended limited business. We had a subsequent request from the property owner 2 meetings ago. We talked, and he had requested for LaSalle's Landing, and had even put out the suggestion that possibly a 4-story apartment building, hotel or something. So obviously, this committee wanted to go out and take a look at that. So first, we drove to Littlewood Lane. many thanks to the residents there. We did get permission to walk the backyards of Littlewood Lane and see what a four-story building, may look like and, what that impact is. So we, walked through some backyards, again, with permission from the residents. Doug's got some pictures to share in a moment of our tour. But as he's pulling up, and Doug, you can kind of walk through the photos you took there,
It was mostly one photo, I just,
kind of highlighted. That
Gold
shows
Coast, they're further
the
away.
building at the end, so the buildings you can see from Empire Boulevard. These are the backside of them, and this is a two-story barn, and you're seeing it pretty clearly already from the backyard of the home that's there on the end. There are some mature trees in the back that provide a buffer to the other neighbors that are out there. But the applicant, or the owner at the last meeting, shared that, his desire was to kind of clear to the property line, which you can see is the chain link fence, and then take out the mature trees, put in a retaining wall, and then, put some supplemental plantings back in. Obviously, and then Doug's pulling up the other view, so this is looking from the Empire Boulevard side. It is up a grade a little bit, so I think there is some opportunity that you could possibly cut that into the hill a bit more and provide some buffering, but that's that same barn from the Empire Boulevard side, so you can see it's a two-story. But Doug was also highlighting, you can kind of see in the backyard, I think you could see the ladder of the pool of the yard we were standing in, so from Empire Boulevard, you can kind of see right up into those backyards and where they were there. So that's kind of where Doug's highlighting. So we started on the one end and kind of walked down the end, and then that thins out a little bit. So there, it's pretty well buffered through the trees. You can't see a whole lot, but I think we judged we're about 35 feet above, where the properties were in Empire, and then we walked down to the end, and that's where the pictures were taken down at the end there, and you can see those barns pretty clearly.
Yeah, so I think the original recommendation of limited business is where I would stand. I don't see any reason to change that recommendation.
I think this group also had some concerns. I mean, limited business is shorter, but I think a maximum of 2 stories, I think, was kind of this group's thought as well, was the impact on the height. The neighbors we met with said, we understand, a rezoning may take place. We understand it's an Empire, a commercial aspect. They didn't seem to have a concern for that, and we didn't canvass every neighbor back there. They understood that something would happen with it, but obviously, a 4-story building and clearing out their buffer, was a little bit of surprise to them. Again, it's, kind of hypothetical at this point, but that's kind of the recap of stops 3 and 4. We stopped there and then jumped down to Empire Boulevard, but just wanted to recap that tour and that conversation, and then see if, make sure that's what kind of this group, again, thought, that limited business probably is the best choice to remain with with a 2-story cap on that elevation. That's what,
Yeah, for me, yeah.
okay.
No, I agree.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so it sounds like that was a
And the only
unanimous.
The only
amongst-
question is does the Hill Haven closure potentially send him off to reconsider what he's doing?
That's a good point, because Hill
Because that's a
Haven,
4-story building sitting there as part of Hill Haven, so I mean,
it
Yeah,
is,
and
but
that's-
but if you notice, when that was built, you see the back portion of that property still remained as R120, and that was done purposefully to buffer the neighbors that were building their tract housing behind that back in the 60s. And that actually is designed to, if they build housing there, that's fine, but they're not allowed to go in and ask for rezoning under the original proposal.
okay.
So as
And the property
Doug
is
pulled
all
up on the screen.
multi-residential. It may end up being a multi-residential development before it's done, once they close it down. The problem you have over here is that the property's about right up next to the back of the
Yeah, and
property.
realistically, what's the acreage for that piece of property?
for the one we were looking at, or
3.4.
for Hill Haven?
No, I mean the one we're discussing, not this one, the one we're discussing. It's comparatively, look at the size of it's a much smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, again, where you could have some set aside for the one above and be able to buffer a 4-story building, there is no room on that to buffer a 4-story building.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, I'm
and
not
it's
suggesting
skinny.
that we agree with 4 stories on that property.
No, you're just mentioning the fact that if it goes to, yeah, you've got something there to reference. Did you talk at all about the little home that's right next to it to the south there?
We didn't in this last tour, but originally this group had also recommended
Limited
making that
business.
limited business at
Yeah.
the same time. We didn't specifically call that out at the last tour. We pulled in, parked, looked, took some pictures, but.
And you're still comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
So those were the tours that we did last week. So that's kind of the recap of those. Any other comments, questions on our,
Can we go back?
Site tour.
In preparation of this document I'm preparing for you for review to the town board, can we just go back for a minute and look at the properties along 250 over by Pembroke Drive in that area? I just want to verify what our thoughts were before I put something on paper. More particularly, just north of the Gymnastics Training Center on Route 250. So we had that vacant parcel, which is south of the residences. And I thought, our initial thought was to create some kind of a transitional buffer between those residences, like a townhouse development. And then we started talking about the fact that if we were ever to be able to tie into those properties with an internal access road at Pembroke Drive and 250, that first home would probably not be able to stay residential. It would have to go to a commercial use in order to use the incentive to get them to that light intersection. Did we then talk about the possibility of changing those houses to limited business or something of that nature to get to that point? We talked about those properties, and then we also talked about the three on the east side that are north of north of Heathwood, to go to like a multi-residential use with the idea of possibly just transitioning from Heathwood into the properties at Random Knolls to the north.
Yeah, you talked about the first house being combined with that recommendation, but we didn't talk about the remaining, at least not that my notes show.
The thing I'm worried about is if we convert the first house, now you may have a domino effect, or you may create an impact to the other residences next to it, because now you've gone to a limited business. Limited business allows for things like convenience marts and gas service, that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering what our thought process was, and I apologize for not remembering that. We were on the tour together, but we threw some things out initially, but then I thought we had started to think about how it was going to affect that one house that would.
You were going to actually go back and reference the neighbors, the owners of those properties?
Right, but I wanted to know what your thoughts were in terms of an actual rezoning recommendation before we did that. I mean, we'll talk to every one of them before we're done, but I'm still caught between the idea of townhouses on that property just north of Sarah Jane's property, and then how to wrestle with the single-family residences to the north of that. Because they do have the healthcare facility across the street, the nursing home across the street, and then you had the three properties that have the potential for multi-residential to the back. And I'm not sure what will happen to the back at this point in time, but those three, I thought we had recommended or made a recommendation that they might go to like multi-residential for like.
We did.
2 families, something like that. So you're comfortable with, is everybody still comfortable with that?
We did for those three, but if you go back, you raise a good point. Should that recommendation really encompass all of the properties, right? That's what you're asking, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So you've got
I
town
mean,
parkland.
because my note's a little cryptic, but I think what we thought you were going to do is get a consensus. In other words, I don't want to make a if all those landowners say, I don't like it just the way it is, please don't, we're not interested. I mean,
Right.
because again, there's those whole run of homes on Browncroft that you guys have spoken to that would be perfect for commercial, and all those homeowners have said, no,
No.
we are very
That's
happy.
right.
I would prefer to have the homeowners' input before I made a recommendation on those 4 or 5.
Okay, does everybody agree with that thought?
Yeah.
West Side Seward, Jim?
That's a very good question.
I
Can we,
don't believe they have sewers. No, they have availability. That would probably be a section to fill in. And
They're within range?
yeah, we have sewer down on the plaza, and we have sewer to the north. The Timber Glen development is kind of the just northwest.
Be gravity?
Wayland, I think we could get gravity through there to those, but that could be an extension either the town puts in or,
Because anytime you go to like a limited business type zoning or anything like that, development, you gotta take that into consideration. too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
yeah, Doug pulled up the sewer map, so if you can see close enough, the pink lines are the sewers. So we've got a crossover which goes to the east, that field services the Timber Glen neighborhood. That stubs down so far. We've got, obviously, the Heathwood development is on sanitary sewers. We've got it across the street, so there's availability.
Okay.
It's not in the, running across the frontages, but that's something good to.
You do bring up a good point, though, and I guess maybe we should check to see if the grades are there without having to go to a lift
I
station or
think,
something of
yeah,
that
you
nature.
might want to really take that into
We
consideration.
can hold off on this until the next meeting and just do some background research for you. And we could call the neighbors there and to see if they are supportive of something like that. You're right, they take very good care of their property. It's not like it's in distress.
Because when we looked at them, they were all in really good shape.
Very good
Again, it was a
shape,
year and a half ago, but when we did that road trip over
Yeah,
there,
yeah, they do a great job on their property, so it may be
If
to
they're
our
not
advantage to
intending
talk to
Go
them.
anywhere.
Pardon?
I say, if they're not intending to go anywhere.
Right, right.
Yeah, what would be the value? I mean, perhaps, again, the first house to facilitate putting the townhomes on that
Right.
property, maybe, if they agree to it, but I think it would, yeah, I'd like to hear what the other homeowners say before we,
Well, yeah, and then the issue is if we do townhomes on that, we're most likely not going to be able to get an access road through the frontage of their properties to head northward to get to that first residence across from Pembroke. And that's one of my questions is, do we stay with townhouse development, or do we look at limited business as an option, or business non-retail as an option to get access through the frontage of that property to get northward to that house?
you're talking about just the first house.
Just the first house, and then obviously that empty.
Well, look at how close the first house is to the second house, though. So if the first house goes to limited business, which could be a gas station,
Yeah, it's a slippery
you know,
slope. then,
now
yeah.
all of a sudden you've got a gas station next to, and it goes back to what Roland was saying, you kind of have to watch this stuff because, you know, they're so close together. You don't even know if you're going to change it over to sanitary sewer. I mean, they'd have to for the commercial aspect of it. But if the second house is not planning on moving anywhere, you know, you got a single-family residence sitting next to a business use that may not be compatible.
Yeah, I really think that polling the current residents, especially in this really bizarrely volatile real estate market, is critical. And I think another thing that we've talked about here before is the lack of affordable single-family homes in Penfield. And I think those would be on the more affordable side, home-wise. So what we can preserve of housing stock that falls into that category, I would say, you know, we certainly should, especially in a market like this.
Yeah, and if they don't want to leave, and their intent is to stay there for whatever time, there's no sense in putting them through that. It doesn't change their tax structure because the housing will still be the tax. It won't be changed to some type of commercial tax. But if, you're right, if they're not going to leave, there's no sense in putting them through the misery of rezoning.
Won't know until you ask.
That's right.
And again, their feedback would directly impact what we would recommend then for
Right.
that remaining parcel. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that if our intent is ever to, at any point in time, to get an access road on the west side of Route 250, an internal access road back up from, you know, up from the corner, that at some point in time would have to go to a commercial use. But that may not happen for several years.
I guess that's why we had a question mark on our.
Yep. I
I
just
think
wanted to
we-
clarify this because
we
I
left it
kind of got
hanging
in the
and
weeds on you on that.
We had questions on our end of where we ended up on that conversation, and obviously, we kind of left that hanging, so we'll.
Yeah,
follow up on that.
I looked at our notes and it was kind of nebulous as to what we were doing there. So I agree, we should talk to the neighbors, number one, and then check the sanitary capacity issue, number two, and then get back to you at the next meeting and see where we want to go with it.
Okay. Any other conversations on site visits before we move on? That was a good clarification on that.
Could you repeat what you said, Mark?
Just if there was any more conversation on the site visit portion of the last meeting, or our last tour, before we just move on to the next item.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Flipping back, and I'm not changing my mind on how I voted. The first project we talked about with regard to the residential development.
I think he's on the second
The
one.
2
We
acres
had
to
one
1
just
acre
before you.
Yeah, I had a question back on that real quick.
Sure.
How are the soils out there?
On the west side, they're pretty good. On the east side, along the 250 strip, they're a little heavier. That's
But in
obviously
this
we got the
area, they're
wetland.
pretty good.
Yeah, say Gary Smith operates a landscape business out of that. He's got trees planted there now, and has crop growing and everything else. So it's
Private
it's been.
septic systems would be
Yep.
reasonable.
He's on septic now. Everybody on Northrop Road is on septic.
So-
To my knowledge, we've not had any issues, concerns with,
Okay,
with
so
with
1
those
acre
neighbors.
would be reasonable. in that
Yeah,
case.
and to Roland's point, 1 acre is the minimum we allow for a septic system, so
Yeah.
that would keep in
Thank
kind
you.
with that.
Sorry, didn't mean to backtrack.
No, it's okay. I'm going to backtrack myself, so I understand, and I do apologize for this because I was not at the site tour the other night. But going back to 1423 Empire Boulevard, which was the one that abuts the Birds Unlimited property to the east or to the west, and then heading up the hill to a single-family residential. That property is split, as we all know, down the middle between LaSalle's Landing and R120, and I think that he had asked for some type of townhouse development on that site. Did I get the impression that the board was more interested in possibly just rezoning that, or recommending rezoning to that, the entire parcel to LaSalle's Landing, or am I mistaken? It does allow for townhouse development.
I thought the committee's recommendation was for townhouse in there,
Yeah,
so
that was also my recollection.
was to rezone it to a townhouse consistency for that.
I'm only concerned because if there's a reason why they can't get townhouse, I mean, I assume that's what he wants to do there. But if they can't get townhouses on that site and it's zoned strictly for townhouses, it kind of puts everybody in a bind because now you've zoned the property for a use that you can't put on there. And I think that's going to have to be determined by him, not so much you, but
Well,
I
I
just
think that
want to
was what he
clarify.
originally came in with, and I think, to my recollection, the committee said, if you're asking for townhouse, it makes sense. I think it would
Yeah.
fit in there, and that's what he was requesting, so I think the committee was
I mean,
supportive.
the problem with LaSalle's Landing is that opens up the opportunity for businesses and things like that, that
You can do restaurants, you can do, obviously,
Yeah.
apartment
I
buildings
mean,
and
I
some
mean-
bigger stuff, and I think the group thought lower scale development.
Well, and I'm thinking lower scale development too. I'm even to the point where I think that it probably should be a 1-story townhouse versus a 2-story townhouse, because I have a feeling that there's going to be some conflict there in terms of existing and proposed neighbors. But I just want to get a clarification from you if the intent is to go to townhouse. I kind of remembered that being the case. So that's what we'll put into the letter.
Let me see.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, actually, I just found my notes. That was on November 12th of 2017. We discussed that. We said yes to townhouse-only zoning.
I
as a
can't
group-
remember
as a
what I had for
group.
breakfast today, so 2017 is not helping.
Was it
Yeah.
2019,
Only
11th, 12th,
because
Yeah,
2019?
19, not
Appreciate
17, yeah.
Oh, 19, okay.
All right.
Sorry, 19, yes.
It's been a long time, but I don't know if it's been
I
that
mean,
long.
wow, Donna started way before the rest of us.
No, I can't read, even with these, I can't read my own handwriting sometimes.
A year
so.
before you even convened.
All right, I think we're all set with the rezoning proposals.
Okay. So the next, as we've continued, Doug had sent out the 2 sections we had talked about in person previously for the group to take a look at, and as well as sending out this is a new section that we've talked about for a while, talking about sustainability. Some of it we put as distinctly ambiguous in certain areas, is we had a conversation at the end of our last meeting, talking about technology. It's hard to say we recommend 5G when
6G's
5G's here today, and who knows what tomorrow is. So some of it we kind of kept
I
ambiguous.
thought we were going to reword, yeah, it was going to be worded so to avail ourselves of the newest technology and make sure we're
Yep, so
we're
that's
able to.
some
yeah.
of it there. So, so Doug had sent this out last week, again, kind of a straw man to get the conversation started on this, and then we've got some other sections, but open it up to, we can go through pages, sections, comments, thoughts, feelings from the committee, but, again, staff kind of generated a straw man on this one to get, conversation started and then see what the committee's thoughts are.
Could I ask a question first? Will we have time to go back over the pieces that we discussed last week that you sent out?
Sure.
And that I was
Yeah.
able to read a lot better on paper than I was on the screens, because I had a few questions, comments, and so forth. from
Yeah,
those.
we can jump back to that. This just had it on the agenda, so I figured I'd follow that, but we can jump back to last week.
We can do that at the end.
Sure.
I mean, those
Okay.
sections at the end, but whatever order you want to do stuff in.
Anybody want to jump in and we can highlight sections, pages?
Oh, sustainability.
So it looks like Doug had, all right, we're back to sustainability.
I've got all three. I've got the three sections we've done: agricultural viability, business development, and economic opportunities, as well as sustainability.
Now we can go to sustainability.
Yeah.
Whatever order.
Sure. Why don't we do that? I mean,
Well, thank you, Mike.
we can knock those off and then get on with the new stuff.
Okay.
Donna, you want to jump in?
Yeah, actually, I have a little handout with respect to the agriculture one, and it's, I apologize because I was supposed to have submitted this to Doug via email so he could incorporate some of these comments. But at the end of this section on, at the end of the section where the recommendations are, the strategies are for agriculture, something that I had talked about, and I tried to write it up, Doug, in a way that would maybe work out for you. Something I talked about was one way to help increase some interest in maybe keeping our farmlands going here is if we got people who were not traditional farmers engaged through education in learning about farming and potentially having some route into farming in our community. So what I would suggest as strategy number 9, or point 9, if you want to call it that, is towns should collaborate with Cornell Cooperative Extension and other relevant organizations to promote and teach farming and related land management skills to urban residents who could use Penfield Farms as a living classroom. The hope and expectation would be that such experiences and education would stimulate interest and provide sufficient expertise to generate a new source of farmers eager to help keep Penfield's farms active and productive while improving their own quality of life. And then I also kind of jotted down something that Mark Valentine had said that I thought was really fascinating and could potentially be included. Towns should explore the possibility of communally owned farms embedded within a limited, specifically designed ring of residential units. Mark, you referenced this. I don't know where in the country this was.
I'll have to look that up. I saw it on, whether it was Today's Show or Sunday's Show, but they had it, that people bought in on a farm area. You had your house and your plot, but everyone kind of took care of the farm and everybody had a part in it. And, I thought it was kind of a neat setup, and everybody that, you still had your house, but you all shared in obviously growing the crops and, benefiting from that, but everybody was kind of a communal support to it. But I kind of floated out there last time. I'll be happy to do a little more research, pull that up, and then once I find, where that was, and I'm sure there's more than one location, share that with the group. And
It's another good reason to use Town Law
Continue.
278, because then you can incorporate that right.
well,
into
that's
the
kind of what they had
subdivision.
was, that cluster where, there were smaller homes around it, but then the bigger farm remained in the middle, and people that, whether it may not be their day job, but, they could all contribute and benefit from the farm and, growing vegetables and whether having animals and all that. But I can do a little bit of research on that and share that back with the group.
So
Going
I'm
back to
just
number 9 for a
throwing it-
second, I have no problem with number 9, but do we want to limit it to urban students?
Yeah.
Or
Oh.
do we want to open it to everyone?
I'm fine with 9, but I would take out the limitation on urban
Oh,
and just say. it's open
Great,
to-
sure, yep. But I think we would want to make sure we include urban students.
I would just say
too, yeah.
anyone interested or
Yeah.
something of that nature.
All interested parties, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you want to open it up to the world if you could. 'cause
Okay.
we're
Well,
losing our
I
farm.
think the point here is helping to generate the next generation of farmers, more family-oriented farmers versus the, what do you call it, what's the term for large-scale agriculture? I heard it, but I can't remember. Like the
Big agriculture.
Agribusiness?
Yeah, exactly, where they come in and they just buy multiple
Yeah.
plots of farms, take over family farms, but then the way they farm is,
Yeah, I
Not
think encouraging the
necessarily,
next
yeah.
generation, whoever that may be, to come in and learn about agriculture is a positive for all of us.
you know, the other sustainability around farming, and I made a note here, and I can't remember again who brought it up about being able to have something like as an example, a portion with the solar panels, but
I love
higher up,
that,
so that they could farm that they could still farm underneath, but still be able to provide the,
That would be, I'm sorry to interrupt.
no, go right
That would
ahead,
be-
Harold. Roland, sorry.
You're gonna,
That would be a great way to then
Roland,
dovetail. Oh,
you're gonna get yelled at for not being in the microphone. I'll do it for them.
sorry for the
They're mean
interruption.
downstairs.
But dovetailing these two things together.
Sure.
I mean, it's now happening in the southern part of the county. And I know of one area now that currently it's in an ag district that has its first solar farm, 20-acre solar farm going in now as we speak. Going pretty well.
That's in your town? That's in,
Well, my town is Penfield.
no, I mean, the town
Town
you
I
work
work
in.
for,
Henrietta?
But it's in Henrietta?
yes.
Do you have some documentation about?
I can send you the plans, I can send you all kinds of documentation on that.
Particularly your ordinance that it provides for it. That would be
Yep,
very
and,
helpful.
also, the update to the Henrietta comp plan
Yeah.
that addressed that.
I think we'd like to see that.
Yeah, me
Because
too.
it doesn't create much traffic. I don't mean to pick at you.
Well, no,
But I mean.
No, but we're wrestling with how to
it-
handle
it-
that.
It's a reality, it's a reality that's beneficial too, as long as it's controlled. And I'm not talking about having black panels all the way from
You know,
east
but-
side of 250 all the way to County Line Road.
But I think we need to acknowledge that some farmers, similar to cell towers or others, it's a way to support them. If they can generate a revenue off it and that can help pay the taxes a little bit, that can offset some
Well,
of their,
And it is sustainability.
you know.
All
So it's good for the farmer that they're generating a
Yeah.
revenue and sustainable for,
But
generating
if there's a
power
way
from
to
it.
encourage that with like limited density, as just for lack of a better example, a percentage, 15 or 20% of an acreage.
And that's some of the stuff we're working on in the code section, so always
You
happy
know.
to,
Are
look
you-
at what
are
other
you-
towns have done and.
I'm sorry, are you providing for them to be able to farm underneath the panels?
There is, with the current farm that's going up now, there is a provision where they will have certain specific crops in between the panels, like I think alfalfa and things of that nature.
You said cabbages can do with some shading on
I
them.
I could let you know in that spec, I could send you that.
That'd be great.
But so far, so good, and it's, again, it's turning into a good beneficial use for the area. It's the same farming there is facing the same future as it is here, and
I like the combination of pulling
Yeah.
that together, because
Right.
that tells a more comprehensive story and maybe puts us in a better position to make more, I guess, not realistic, but broader recommendations that could fulfill both.
I've read some interesting things about solar panels, and I would question how they could grow crops underneath them.
Spacing.
The
It's all about spacing.
chemicals that they use to clean the panels, as well as if a panel fails, there's heavy metals in it. And what I learned in the city was that they're considering those fields to be brownfields after the panels are removed because of the toxic chemicals in them. And in addition to that, there's no place to get rid of the panels. They can't recycle them, so they all go over to China in a giant landfill.
I could research that
So,
and get back to you.
I mean,
how
I'm sure
that's-
there's a solution,
how
but I
that's-
have
How
heard
that's
of-
being addressed.
I have heard that, at least in the city, they consider that to be a brownfield once the panels come down,
How long ago did you hear that?
just recently.
Just
Yeah, I
recently?
mean, the technology changes every day, but,
Be nice to know that, though.
I had a question on the ag part. The last item where we talked about, you mentioned the town should review the easement agreements with farmers to provide flexibility. I thought we discussed that that would not actually be up to the town. It would be more up to the funders who provided the funding for that easement and the taxpayers, because we've already voted to do that and spent that money. I'm not sure I would be on board with going back and changing that unless you had a public referendum.
We may have to do that.
It was
We
taxpayer
would
money
most probably
that
have to
purchased
do
that.
Well, and I don't
They-
think the
People that got
conversation,
them got paid pretty well.
and I don't
Some
think
of them
the
were, some of them
conversation
weren't.
would be to undo it, but as Heidi that said on the committee, her easement is so restrictive, it says you can basically do nothing with the property other than do row crops. And she's basically said after Dave Woodward stops farming, she won't be able to afford to pay the taxes on the property and would let the property go into foreclosure. And the next person comes along and says, well, I can't do anything other than crops. So is there an opportunity that will allow her to, put something else on it? Maybe it's not development, but, I mean, she can't so much put a barn on the property to
Or a
help with the
lacrosse
farming,
field.
or put is there some other opportunity that she can do that, not saying to undo it to have homes, but
Right.
is there something that could keep it viable that she can keep paying the taxes and
No,
keep it
and I
on the tax
understand, and I
rolls?
certainly appreciate that predicament, but the other side of the coin is her family got paid good money for that opportunity. So if you lived in Penfield and you voted for that bond act and your taxes went to pay for that, it's probably what you should expect to have.
Some of them are not town driven, though. Some of them were driven by the State Farm Bureau.
Right, I know, I realize it all depends on, you have to go back to
Right,
whoever funded that.
But you're right, anything we would do would have to go back to a referendum.
Yeah, so I think in fairness, the recommendation was that we think it should be an option for them to be reviewed. What the process will be as far as having to interact with the state or the town or the residents that voted for it, that would be
Right, you'd have to have
stipulated at
public
the
hearings
time.
on it.
Yeah, but our recommendation was that they should at least have an opportunity to be able to present, the option to have it renewed. I don't think we really talked about how they would be changed or adjusted, because we're,
Yeah, and I don't think any of our intent was, let's undo it and just put
No,
homes
no,
back
no,
there,
no.
and they got their money, and now it's
no,
undone.
but if she could get a change that allowed her, as an example, to put a barn up, which would then allow her to farm in a way that she can't today, I don't think that anybody would be unreasonable to at least have the discussion with her to do that. But if she said, I want to put 35 homes on it, well, no, that's.
No. I think we would have to go back to the Farm Bureau, we'd have to go back to Ag and Markets to define what would be permissible under their requirements. It's
Well,
not
Well,
just-
that was the question at the time, and I can go back to the notes. We asked, do we have a clear-cut understanding of what the limitations were? In other words, when they signed the agreement and were paid the money, what was the actual limitations that were put?
And each one's a little bit
Yeah,
different. Some
yeah.
have allowed for, some development as long as it's agricultural and it falls under ag and markets law. Others are very restrictive. It depends on what the agreement, where it
Are
came in
those
through the town.
changes,
whether
are
it came-
those differences between state and town, or are they literally town to town, or
Just
state to state?
agreement to
I mean, was it-
agreement. Each agreement.
Each agreement was
yeah.
slightly different. Some are more
So
restrictive.
each property
if-
was done as its own agreement that was then filed with the county, which outlines what can and cannot be done. Some of them were very restrictive, like the one with Heidi's it is 100% a farm area. It can be used for grazing cattle, growing crops, and that is it. Some of the other ones allowed for farmstead areas, which allows things like farm buildings or a single-family residence for the farmer or their
farm market
for their,
or something
for
else.
their farm workers, or barn silos, things like that. Some of them, that farmstead area, very, very small, to the point that there's not much you could build.
yeah,
It's
so Doug,
basically, was the outline of the house, was the farmstead
Yeah,
area.
you-
Some
you've
of them
answered
were-
the question, so
Yeah.
before I was going to make, I'm not sure where we would put it as a recommendation, but I think that any future discussions like that, there should be a consistent framework that says, so that you don't have to go through this process. If you're telling me there are 65 of these right now, and all 65 are different, I'm going to tell you as a town resident, that's kind of like, that was not very logical. We should have a framework that says these 10 things are always going to be included, and then here's a couple of limiting stipulation based perhaps on the acreage. But
Well, I
that's,
think they looked at each property, and each property has its own characteristics, and then each funder who was funding the organization has different restrictions.
yeah, but I
So
mean,
don't know if I don't know if I would agree
management
with-
of something like that from a town perspective is kind of a pain in the neck. I mean, I get it, what you're saying, but future state, can we at least make a recommendation to put
Well,
some-
Chuck is right about
I
that.
don't agree
though.
with that.
It's the organization that's giving the money out. You know, some of them are less restrictive than others, some are
Each
very
organization
restrictive.
has a different mission.
Right.
So I don't agree with lumping them all together, because they're not the same.
I think if you did some wording to the effect that, you know, you'd recommend that the town would start reviewing these documents to determine how you can certainly preserve agricultural operations in the community while providing some type of relief to an owner to be
Yeah,
consistent with agricultural operations, but
Yeah.
give them some leeway other than just locking them into growing alfalfa for the rest of their lives.
And it
But
helps,
I
it
guess
helps
my
no
point is
one.
it's not the town's prerogative for that.
Well, we can
because-
start the process though and go, we got to go through and look at them and see
Right.
what it is they can and can't do. We don't even do that right now, but
it
they,
I mean,
unless they come
what
to
I
us
just
or
heard was there could be two farm, literally side by side, that have completely different
Absolutely.
agreements based on when they
Absolutely.
were
And they
doing.
do.
And so if you were looking down the road to say, okay, maybe someone wants to buy both of those pieces of property, does that then mean half of my property I can only do alfalfa for the rest of the time, and the other half I can only do corn?
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
so again,
That's why we have to look at them.
those agreements are very short-sighted.
And
if that was
certainly,
the way they were
you
walked
know, the
into,
ag and
yeah.
markets law.
I don't think they were
modifies-
short-sighted. I think they were brought forth by many different organizations that have different agendas. There's the Genesee Land Trust, there's a lot of people that fund that stuff, and they may have different requirements for their funding. So I don't agree that it was short-sighted. I think it was, a lot of thought was put into it. Each property is unique.
Yeah, it was a response to, did we want to preserve this land? And if we do, how do we do it? This agency is willing to give it to us, give us the money to do it. These are the conditions they set forth in order for you to do it. You have to live with the conditions. But again, you know, the ag and markets laws are being modified on a year-to-year basis now, and things that were never even conceived of years ago when we started all of this are now commonplace. So it's just a function of going through and seeing what could be done to make sure that we preserve the land, but by the same token, don't punish the landowner for having it, because Mark's right, sooner or later, they'll just say, I'm done with it. It'll end up in the county, you know, foreclosure, and the county will end up owning it as fallow land. It'll just sit there.
Yeah,
Well,
and
then the town
it'll
can
help
buy it.
nobody. It'll help nobody if it's
can
in a
only-
tax foreclosure loop. And we have several properties in the town that are already within that, not necessarily in the ag areas, but there are several properties that we have that for the last 10 to 15 years.
Oh, absolutely.
Literally go, county owns it, somebody buys it, figures out the property is non-usable, they stop paying their taxes, the county forecloses, and it has been a cycle and a loop. And if that happens with these properties, you know, it helps nobody. If
And that's
80
right.
acres is now in a tax foreclosure loop, nobody's buying it, or the people who are buying it on the hope that they can do something more than plant crops, you know, not even have a barn or silo on the property, just plant crops. It doesn't help the residents, it doesn't help the farming community, and, you know.
So Doug, that's my point.
Yeah.
My point is, if you've got all these parcels of land and each individual one has a separate agreement with separate limitations, it becomes a challenge for the town to be able to manage those and make recommendations and kind of help help the growth pattern moving forward, whether it's combining several farms to make one large farm or regardless, I'm looking through the lens maybe of more a business-oriented mind, but to me, patchwork of like that, it becomes very difficult for the town to manage, and then you get
It
into
is.
situations like that. So, it seems to me that if the town has any ability to put some level of controls over the top of those agreements, they should step up and do that. If they don't, then they don't. If you say, listen, they don't, and you just live with it, then we live with it. But it's like I said, it doesn't, if we're making recommendations as a comprehensive planning board, illogical situations like that are a challenge in order to make a blanket recommendation. You have to say, well, for this one piece of property, we recommend X, but for this one piece of, we don't, quite frankly, as a group, have time to take a look at 65 properties that could be similar to hers that are struggling just like she is.
Well, I think
How do we
you're
ma- how do we
making
make a blanket-
I think
how
you're
do-
making the assumption that that was done illogically, and I don't agree with that.
I think what we're trying to do here is, we're trying to be futuristic. And with that, you can't always have a crystal ball in front of you, but you have to provide means in order to, address different circumstances as they come up in the future. And you can't just lock in to what was agreed to always 20 years ago, and that it will only ever be that way forever and ever, amen. That's
That's what I'm
That's-
saying,
that's,
Roland. I think, when the individuals entered into those agreements probably in good faith, and maybe they thought 20 years ago this would be great. And yes, her father did make out and have a retirement fund because he did that with the property, but it impacts our ability to make recommendations across the town as a whole because it's a patchwork.
Right, but George, you got to play the cards you're dealt.
Yeah, no, understood.
You know,
Understood,
so
but
I think-
but my point was, Donna, for future state, I don't see anything wrong with clearly making a recommendation. Don't do these as patchwork as you've done them in the past. Put a few controls in
But
place.
if the only way to save.
You've got to appease the people that are paying the money, all the different foundations, and they're not going to agree to that.
Yeah, if the only way to save something is to have a patchwork quilt, then I'm all in favor of the patchwork quilt. I agree, it would be nice if things were consistent, but sometimes, if anybody here has ever done anything on the public side, and you've had to get grants, and you've had to basically cobble together money from different sources,
you have to
take it where you
provide
can get it.
flexibility.
This has not been a nuisance to us in any way over the years. It's really been a nuisance to the property owners more than anything else. We administer the agreements with whatever agency we're dealing with. I think the key really, though, is any recommendation you might make would be to say, let's look at these documents and see how viable they are as it relates to what's happening in the world today versus what it was when it was first written and approved, or what can we do to, maintain.
Yeah, I agree, Jim.
Maintain the agricultural component while at the same time ensuring that the property owners aren't so distressed by it that, they're not going to pay the taxes on it anymore, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what Donna said. You deal with the cards that you were dealt, and if you've now explained to me that there really isn't an option for the town to be able to put
That's
checks and
correct.
balances in, then we move on. I got
We're
it.
really at the mercy, as you noted, we're at the mercy of whatever agency is providing the funding for it. They have their process as to what they do. They do it all over the state of New York, and we are just one little component of that overall program.
Doug, I'd like to just mention one other thing, point number 5 on the agricultural viability section. Towns should streamline building permit processes for the issuance of building permits for agricultural buildings, which in most cases I think sounds great, but one of the things that we talked about was the sort of mega multi-acre greenhouses and things like that. So I think we have to reference that or those maybe as a separate type of an issue in this agricultural section, that those require a special look, and that's going to be in the future. I sent a link to you, to Jim, and to Mark, actually just before I left home, an article from the New York Times that references not just the types of operations that are in, say, Webster, that are taking up physically a lot of land, but sort of big multi-story hydroponic greenhouses and things like that, that don't seem to be an issue, certainly for us here for now, but maybe in the future. And I think we have to kind of think ahead and include a section about that.
I think the other half of that, Donna, is the agricultural buildings are changing somewhat that the farmers want to build, because now they're trying to make more money on other activities, you know, maple syrup, breakfast, and that kind of stuff. So now you're building buildings that are agricultural buildings, but you're serving the public.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you can't really streamline the building permit process if you're looking to have the public in there.
Well, we were
If you're
thinking a
just
little
farmer
more.
that wants to build a hay barn.
Well, that's right. We were thinking a little more myopically in the fact that if somebody came in and said, hey, I need to put a barn up for my hay, or I need to store a tractor in this area, not to drag it out to the point where they've lost a season trying to get the thing up.
Yeah, our
But
current-
you're
our
absolutely
current
right.
code
And we did talk
largely-
about the mega buildings and how we had to look at, you know, the viability or the, you know, the pros and cons of such an activity.
Right. Yeah, because the note we had,
I mean-
the note I had around those large buildings is we were going to actually handle that, like Donna said, as a separate discussion point
Yeah.
in the document, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think what you got to remember is, along with what Jim just said, I think, there's no reason to prolong somebody wanting to put up a straightforward pole barn and making it go through an ordeal in front of the town board and the planning board for like 2 years to get approvals.
Right.
That's the intent.
And that's largely
And that,
been-
and I've seen this in a lot of overkill in other
Yeah.
communities.
And this only
And this-
applies to agricultural operators. It does not apply to some guy who's got 5 acres of land and wants to put up a barn, put his jet skis in or something like that. That's not, it doesn't apply to just a resident who wants to put personal storage into the barn. It applies to agricultural operators trying to, you know, maintain their properties.
And
So
this
do
is
we want to
largely a
go-
requirement that's already in place within Ag and Markets Law. There is, and I'd have to pull it out, the exact wording, but they basically already state in Ag and Markets Law that towns are not allowed to make the building process any more difficult than absolute minimum for agricultural uses. Right now, ours does currently require site plan approval for any structures greater than 1,000 square feet, which would include most of the pole barns and things that farmers are looking to put up to store their products and tractors and things like that. So, you know, if we can make it a little easier for them to get a building permit, you know, for storing Christmas trees from the farm or tree
Yeah.
farms,
It
or
could be an
or
administrative
keeping their
approval
tractors that
versus-
have previously been
Exactly.
sitting out on, you know, inside a cold storage building. You know, once you get into plumbing and electrics and a bunch of the other requirements that, you know, go along with more public-facing buildings or farm markets or something like that, that's less of what we're looking at. It would be more, you know, X farmer wants to put up a pole barn to store 3 tractors and, you know, attachments, something like that.
After all, we're trying to encourage agriculture, and agriculture is business.
So could we just modify that point then to maybe be a little clearer that we're talking specifically about those agriculture-type buildings?
Yeah, I could do something like cold
I
storage
wouldn't,
buildings.
I wouldn't specify it any more than that.
Okay.
That's my opinion. That-
We do have to add something about the large buildings, though.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll add a point in there about
Yeah.
a separate point about large-scale
Yeah.
That would be, yeah.
agricultural
General-
operations or agro-business operations.
Anything else on that?
It's not for me.
Any other comments on the agricultural section?
I have nothing.
Want to jump into the business section?
So the business section we reviewed at last meeting, does anybody have comments or concerns, additional ones, now that you've had the time to review it a little bit more thoroughly?
Okay,
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry. Could you speak up?
In moving on to the business development and economic opportunity section, it was one that we did review at the last meeting. I was asking if anyone had any additional comments based on being able to review it a little bit more thoroughly.
I've kind of two things. One is really simple. One, I think there's just a cut and paste thing at the end, the section that says strategies at the end and the section that says implementation has the exact same
Yep,
language.
that was part of my initial edit process, the way we had previously organized it. The strategies were laid out, the implementation took those strategies and outlined more specific details on how those strategies could be implemented. I just haven't had time to get into the document in the past week or so to
Okay, yeah,
add
sure,
those
I
in
just
there.
didn't know about that. The other kind of more general comment that I have is, it seems to be, this whole section seems to me to be written with sort of rose-colored glasses on, and I'm not so sure it's as reflective of the reality of being here.
Funny you say that. I'd written it with non-rose-colored glasses, and I think it was so dark
Jim.
that I think Doug tried to bring it back a little bit more to.
We can strike a balance, but I
Yeah, we
think,
can, yeah, well,
We
we
do
strike a
agree,
balance, because
yeah.
we have the COVID doom and gloom business is
It
done
was
as
pretty
we
bad,
know
man.
it, and we had the
we
sort of.
tried to brighten it up a little bit, so.
I had Amazon in there and everything else
Okay.
going on. But
Okay.
yes, we do agree with that.
So I don't know if it's
Oh.
worth really discussing it, sort of going through point by point, or whether maybe you want just us to submit, everybody to read it carefully, and then just to submit some thoughts to you and take a
Yeah.
crack at it that way
Yeah.
and save time tonight.
Yeah, we do have
for
to,
the
wrestle
sustainability.
with the competition from the internet services versus our mom and pop operations throughout the community, and there are many. I mean, the mom and pop stores really are the backbone. But again, there's a lot of pressure now to not be using them. So I went down that path, but I think they brought me back a little.
You went to the dark side for a little
I
bit.
did,
so
I really did go dark, but
Maybe we pulled it back too rosy,
Yeah.
but if you've got comments or anybody, obviously, his comments, we'll amend those in there, and then we can float out
If you want to
a,
run through it, we can run through it.
Yeah, I'd like to be
final
able to
draft.
kind of walk through, once you've had a chance to outline the implementation, I could kind of like to tackle, I'd like to tackle the section when it's,
Yep.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
fleshed out a little.
yeah,
Yeah.
fleshed out a little more, yeah.
Okay.
So
Good point.
I would just urge my compatriots here to read it, review it, send Doug comments, and then we can take a look at it again when those are, when whatever relevant ones from there are maybe incorporated along with your modified implementation
Yeah.
section. We can just take another peek at
Okay.
it then.
And maybe let Mr. Doom and Gloom have a little more input into it.
I thought the whole thing was going to shut down. Not done.
You were in a dark place, Jim, weren't you?
We're just talking hair salons, dental operations, and doctor's offices by the time we were done. so.
But I liked the thought process where we stated the kind of I guess we'll call it the internet versus the mon pie. I definitely would like to see a little more meat around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jim, is there any business owners you can bring in that we could,
Oh, I'm
pick
sure.
their brain a little bit? 'Cause
Yeah,
we
I'm
had
sure
some
we could
farmers
bring
come in, we
several
had some
people in
other
if you'd
people come
like.
in.
I could
I'd like to
bring,
hear what they're thinking, because
Yeah.
they're the ones gonna be spending the money.
Is there a way we
Absolutely.
could bring, I'd like to bring in maybe, to add on to that, I'd like to bring in business owners, some who sailed through COVID without many challenges and how, their perspective, but then also some that really struggled.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, even, looking at Home Depot, for instance, there are people going online now and ordering it online for Home Depot versus going to the store. All they're doing is picking it
I
up
think
when
we
they get
kinda
it.
gotta put the COVID behind us, though, because this is supposed to be a future plan, so maybe,
Well, yeah, and
maybe we
that's
try to forget that happened and try
We
to
hope.
find out what business people are thinking is gonna happen in the next 5 years.
And what strategies they're going to be using
Exactly.
to move forward.
Right,
Yeah,
because the internet's gonna continue to be there, and
absolutely. No question about it. So, yeah, it's a good idea. We'll bring in maybe a couple different levels as to who made it through, who's having difficulty.
And to piggyback on the request for people, can we, I want to revisit, we were going to bring some folks in to talk to, some, from a standpoint of younger community members, we're going to talk to us a little bit about kind
they'd
of their
like to see?
perspective.
What they'd like to see here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because right now, I mean, the average age of most of the folks that are on the board versus the people we've talked to are towards the one end of the spectrum, and we haven't talked to any of the younger folks that are here renting and what they think and what they'd like to see. Even a couple just recently younger homeowners would be good to talk to as
I
well.
have a 32-year-old who I'm fairly close to would be more than happy to give you her ideas about what should
I
and
say
should
bring
not
her-
be here.
Bring her in, let's talk to her. I have a sneaky suspicion I might know who that is.
You do.
Anything else on business development tonight? Obviously, we've got more to flesh out and obviously welcome comments, and we'll continue doing that. But just so we give ourselves a little bit of time to get into the sustainability section, and then start collecting thoughts on that
Yeah.
tonight. And anybody want to jump in and go first?
Doug, did you want to walk us through it first before we make comments, or?
I'll actually defer this one to Mark. This section was largely Mark and Sarah, who is.
Yeah,
in
so
fact, one of
the
our
initial, obviously similar to other sections, gave a little background. The town is getting more into sustainability through our Energy and Environmental Advisory Committee. We did obviously environmental stuff, long before that, but that group kind of formalized some of those things back in 2010. And then working with that group, kind of highlighted, and some of the stuff is captured on our website. Streetlight innovation, we were one of the first towns, or maybe the first town in the area that bought our streetlights back from RG&E. So back in the day, RG&E owned all the poles, and we just paid a rent per month per pole. We found out we were getting charged more rent than we had poles, and poles had come out, and so we took them back. We've owned them since the 90s, and then we've been in a program. As any light goes out, we've been replacing them with LED. So we're changing from high-pressure sodium metal halide, one more dark sky compliant, to more energy efficient. And then obviously continuing through that, we look for, grants and other opportunities that we can keep changing those over and moving to LED through that. A little highlight of, we were the first in Monroe County to have public car charging stations. So we had out here, I think we have 3 going on 4 right now. We've got one at Harris Wayland Park, one at the library that's been there for many years, and then one here out back. This one I can attest to, it's pretty much used every single day. Somebody's plugged into it, which is good to see. But to the town's credit, we've always tried to kind of, if we're going to ask developers to do it, we should kind of show that we do it first. So we had a rain garden before rain gardens were really out there. We've done biofilters. We have solar panels in different locations. So as Doug's rolling into the solar panels, we did them first for the offset of a pump station. Obviously, it's not a direct offset. It powers back to the grid. The grid, then powers the pump station, runs whether it's darker day or night. But we did that. We put them on Harris Wayland. We've got a dashboard over there that kind of shows the power that it's collecting. That does some education effort. People are over there. You can kind of see what it's generating, what it's not. And then most recently doing them over at the DPW facility. That was, I think what got in back in the day when you could do net metering. Basically, we took the collective of our town buildings, what our power we use as the town ourselves, and then offset that with what we put over at the DPW facility. So again, that powers back to the grid, but offsets about 75 to 80% of what our electric power usage is in a typical year. We've got that on dashboard as well, and look to highlight that. And then getting down into, and I think this is the policy statement that we've already got online. The town board has made statements of, is committed to identifying, engaging in practices to manage town government impacts on an environment in ways that deliver value to the taxpayers. This includes reducing energy use, increasing use of renewables, participation in the state and federal programs, and adding sustainability practices to public policy. So that was the policy that we've used thus far. And then getting into some of the items that we've listed, and some of this stuff is taken from EPA, other sources, NYSERDA. So can't say that we've invented this, but, item A, reduce, reuse, and recycle appropriate materials. We continue to do that through our facilities now, recycle bins, recycling cans. But we also offer opportunities for the residents, spring drop-off, to bring materials here, drop-off. We have lots of references to Eco Park. If anybody doesn't know about Eco Park, that's the county facility. They take pretty much, back in the day, it was pretty much anything but wood, recycle styrofoam, recycle metals, batteries, light bulbs, hazardous household materials. We work back and forth with Webster every year to host hazardous household material drop-off, whether it's here in Webster, that's collected, with that. Pursue new green technologies and methods to become more sustainable. Kind of a generic statement, but again, trying not to pigeonhole us too deep into one avenue, just to kind of show a broad topic of that. The implementation of the community choice aggregation. That's something the town board passed the law, I think it was back in 2019 now, that allowed that to happen through 2020. The Energy Advisory Committee looked at that. That's something that currently the town has selected Good Energy as its administrator for that, and they're going out to doing an RFP out to the power companies to see what rate we can get if we look at power for the entire town. So right now, if you're on RG&E as your power source, if the town found that we can get a better rate and a greener rate, leveraging all the entire town, people would be transferred over to that. So hopefully, you're buying the power at a known flat rate through the town. There are opportunities to opt out if people don't want to be in that program, but that's something the town board will be looking at coming up. Is one, is it a cost savings to the town, and two, making sure it's green and environmental and leveraging those sources. Item D, developing a sustainability section in the town code. That's something we are working on at the same time and in parallel task with what we're doing right now. So this would be a new or an additional section to the town code that talks about solar farms and the parameters around that, talks about wind farms and what the parameters, buffers would be, allowability of geothermal, any other elements that, kind of fall into that. So we do allow solar today. We allow solar if you want it on your house, you want it on your backyard that offsets your power. Currently today, we don't allow it as a primary source on a property. So if it would be a direct power generation, we don't allow that currently. We're trying to build that code. So we do have and can implement buffers around that. It's not a possibility for us just to say no. If we say no, we don't want a solar farm. The state is out there right now looking at properties, not in Penfield, but overall. I mean, they may be looking at Penfield overall, and they've got an authority out there that basically says if you have no code or you have a code that's overly restrictive, we will basically ignore your code and just say, here, we're going to do it for you. So that's some of the stuff we've seen in other towns that they've come in for the bigger 25, 50 megawatt and above. They just say, well, your town code's too restrictive, or you outlaw it. Similar with cell towers and others, the government comes in 5G. Some of these things, if we just said flat out, no, we don't want it in our community, they go, thanks for your comments, but here you go. So we're trying to come up with a balance of what that code is, how that lays out. One, hopefully we can get, enough parameters in to provide buffers to neighbors, percentage of the property can have solar panels, coverage on it, but we can't make it too restrictive, or again, the state could come in with larger projects and just say, you guys are way too restrictive, or you've just outlawed it altogether. We're not going to allow that. So that's something we're working on in the background. And then item E, implementing EPA's smart growth principles, and then we've kind of got those itemized down below. Doug, if you want to scroll a little further, those are at the bottom, so those kind of goes through those items. But so it's E, items 1 through 10. Again, those are things that EPA kind of put out there. So I kind of ran through those implementation sections. They're stuff that we've looked at so far. We can add in items we're supportive of, new technologies, but I try to stay away from key lingo words of whether 5G or fiber. Obviously, we know those elements are going to change. So to a pinpoint in time to say we're supportive of this item in particular, we know will be dated by tomorrow. So by the time we wrap the document, so that was at least kind of the straw man that I put together, and just to kind of show some of what we've done, capture a little bit of history of where we've been and then hopefully kind of a little bit of a vision of, you know, where we're looking to go as a community.
Under the section sustainability policy statement, that the town board's committed to manage town government's impact on the environment, which is great, of course. But what I don't see, and maybe it exists within this policy elsewhere, is anything about managing the actual town to be sort of a low-impact town in terms of the environment. You know, what should we be doing to make Penfield carbon neutral by a certain date? And I think, should we put out a date and throw it out there and say, we hope Penfield can be carbon neutral by, and then think it through, work it through, but pick a date. So we have something to aim for. Because if you don't aim for something, you don't usually hit it very well. But
There are some programs, and sorry, I don't mean to interrupt your conversation.
ahead.
There are some programs that are out there and things that the town has been looking at. There's clean energy communities, there's programs you can join with that, and then climate smart communities. And some of those programs kind of outline some of those parameters, and I can bring some of that information back, but those are two items that the Energy Advisory Committee is looking at right now, as well as the town board. So rather than us just kind of arbitrarily picking a spot, some of those programs kind of step you through those elements, and that's, you know, maybe that's a recommendation, is supportive of those, and those look to be more of a carbon neutral community, and that's what, you know, those programs are focused on.
But I think it would be valuable then to include in the sustainability policy statement, I mean, not that you're going to change this one that exists on the website or something, but to supplement that in some way to indicate in that same section that there are town-wide policies independent of, you know, sort of changing things for the government of the town. We understand, you know, the solar panels on Harris Wayland and, you know, trying to switch over to energy-efficient vehicles for the town and limit the number and all of that, and that's very good. But I think we need to explain a little bit more what some of the efforts were
So you're thinking about
undertaking are.
possibly if you had a plaza or something like that, to encourage more charging stations or something of that nature, or going solar on their roofs or something of that nature?
Yeah, things like that. Are we able to, I mean, I think a big one, given development in Penfield, is are we able to incorporate into building code requirements green energy requirements? I know some towns have done that, where, you know.
Well, you're kind of at the mercy of the New York State Building Code, though, as you're going through this, because, I mean, it's not as easy as you think, because until the state building code requires that stuff to happen, no developer's gonna spend any more money than he has to put it in place. If a town has the ability to create conditions of approval for something like that, and they're willing to agree to it and not sue us for an Article 78 proceeding, yeah, it could happen, but the state building code really drives new development in the state of New York.
And
I suspect as time goes on, they'll do
I
something
know
like
the
that.
International Building Code, and I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I know there's a new International Building Code out there, and I know New York State is looking at that, so
Yeah.
that
We just
adoption may come.
adopted the new energy code, so.
You did?
And that
The
may
state
be,
did.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's gonna move in that direction just naturally, because the state codes will move to that. Until they do that, though, we're kind of at their mercy.
So can we make the recommendation to ensure that we're on the forefront of what the state is doing, and as soon as they're available, we recommend the town, you know, incorporate them?
I mean, once
can't-
the-
you don't
once
have
the
a-
state
you don't
moves
really
to
have a
it, we're
choice.
automatically in, once the state's in, but the
Okay.
state is looking at, the International Building Code kind of is always more at the forefront, and then other states join in. New York State kind of lags a little bit, but I think just wants to make sure it works and is kosher, and then, you know, New York State will jump on board. But we're expecting the next update or the next adoption of the International Building Code, and every level, again, gets more environmentally conscious, more Energy Star efficiencies, and
Yeah.
they add more levels of insulation and, you know, other requirements for building code. But I'm expecting, and I don't know the ins and outs of this next one, but I know there's a new one that's coming out shortly.
Is there a way to incentivize developers rather than making it, to codify it, to just simply incentivize the developers to pursue green practices?
You could do that. I mean, certainly you're not forcing them to do it, but you might incentivize them to get more density or something of that nature in order to bring the building to more green compliant development.
Well, would anybody object to putting language to that effect in, that we feel that, within our, I don't know, rules and regulations, we don't want to sort of incentivize somebody in the
Well,
wrong way.
that's
but,
right, exactly. You gotta be
or create a
careful.
perverse incentive to do
Yeah.
something on the flip side. But to find some language that suggests that we will provide appropriate incentives to developers who follow green practices.
But how do you pay for that?
I don't think those incentives would come from the town. There's NYSERDA, there's a lot of other agencies
Right.
that loan builders money based on the efficiency of their building. And I don't think the town would have a differential ability to do that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chuck. I think the only thing the town could do is say, look, if you're willing to do this for green, we're willing to give you more units. That's a slippery slope when you do that.
The
You gotta be very
energy
careful.
code that we just adopted is pretty strict,
Is it?
yeah.
Yeah, and I think Mark's right. I think as time goes on, you're going to see just a natural progression of this happening. I'm sure the state of New York has picked a date that they think is going to be, they're going to be carbon-free before that point, and all this will help to get to that point through the administration of the codes.
And I know the board's are obviously conscious of it. I mean, they recommended and encouraged developers for years to put in electric car charging stations, or at least put the conduits in for it. So we've started to see those in new developments that at least have some accommodation for it. And then, conduit's cheap, at least put the conduit in under the parking lot before you pave it. So when and if you need more, it's there. If you don't need them, then so be it. You just got an extra, conduit that's not used. But that's been something that, the planning board and the town board and other boards have been encouraging to at least think about it. Baytown Plaza, Walmart went in, they added some car charging stations. And obviously now, as we see electric cars continue to progress, obviously that's the future.
I think education could be one of our focuses, is to educate and encourage residents to pursue various green technologies, even if we can't require a building developer to say, hey, you have to put solar on every roof. We can work on programs where we can educate residents to say, here are the NYSERDA programs to do solar roofs, or here are some of the programs that the federal government sponsors on doing solar roofs, and here's how you can apply. Here's the programs, and really push the focus on post-initial development, just to encouraging homeowners and residents on things that they can do.
Okay, sounds good.
Anybody else have any feedback, thoughts?
I had another question, thought, issue, and that is something that you guys may not have the answer to. This may be a town board thing, but and this relates to the community choice aggregation issue. The Penfield went with Good Energy, which is a responsible organization. But as far as I understand it, Good Energy, unlike Joule, Joula, like the electrical unit, which is what Brighton, Pittsford, Arundecoit, and the town of, and the city of Rochester all went with as a group. Good Energy, as I last understood it, did not have green energy as the default for the choices. And that's kind of why New York State, pushed through this process in the first place, was to have a green energy default for this aggregation of purchasing, so that it would encourage people to buy green energy because it would be cheaper, because the power sources were aggregated. And if they were aggregated toward green, you'd always choose that. Few people would opt out. But as I say, the last time I read anything about it, Good Energy did not have that as the default.
They
Is
offered it-
that true?
They
or-
offered as an option, so you can go 100% green. That's not the only option, but to my last understanding, Brighton is the only one that went ahead with CCA under that program. The other two communities, or three communities, between the village, town of Pittsford, and the town of Arundecoit, they went out to the market and found that it was too expensive. It was above what the current rate is, and they opted not to move forward with CCA. So
okay.
while they chose Jewel, I believe Brighton is the only one of that group that chose to move ahead with the CCA at this time.
Because the city of Rochester just made an announcement about it.
And maybe the city of Rochester moved ahead, but those other three that were part of that original
Yeah.
consortium, they went out to the market, they did choose Jewel, they went out for prices, 100% green, and the numbers came in higher than the other communities thought that they should be or wanted to move forward with for their community.
Okay.
So they're kind of in limbo right now, and they've kind of held off. Good Energy does offer a 100% green option, but I know, and I won't speak for the town board, but I believe they're looking at all options and making sure, one, it's green, but two, it makes financial sense for the residents of Penfield.
But I guess my point is that if it only makes financial sense, and let's say it's 2 cents less a kilowatt hour to use conventional over green, and, you know, again, for the sake of argument, every resident chooses the conventional power as opposed to the green power, then this item doesn't belong under sustainability, because it does nothing to help us, and in fact, it may provide a disincentive to conserve energy if you're getting energy cheaper.
And I
So
don't
there
think-
has to be some.
And I
there
don't
has
think
to
any
be-
of their option is called totally brown. I mean, I think all components of what they're offering have some green component in it. So it may not be 100%, but I don't think they're offering a straight fossil fuel, here's as cheap as option, and I don't think the town board is considering that option. So whether it's 100% green or it's 89% green or some fractional, but it's a savings, I think the town board is looking at those. Again, you'll have to ask them and not me, but I don't think the town board would, or has got into this program to say, we're just going for the dirt cheap price that's out there. I think they want both.
I'll follow up with the town
Where-
board. That's
where
why
that
I
falls
kind
and
of
everything else,
prefaced
but-
it by saying, I don't know if it's
Yeah,
you
and
guys
I
or the
don't
town
wanna-
board, so, yeah. Yeah,
Treading on
I'll-
areas that
I'll
I shouldn't be
follow up
treading
with
on,
them.
and I don't need to get involved in the politics part of it, but I don't believe the town board got into it to say, we're just gonna go for, use this program to get the cheapest power available. I think they're hoping that there's an option that they can get it 100% green and be a cost savings to the residents.
Oh, I hope you're right. I'll follow up.
So the recommendation then might be to, again, today it may be a balance between the two, but our recommendation could be to track to that 100%.
Yeah, if that's not the option chosen, then, I mean, ultimately, as, and part of the CCA program is to, as you're investing more and more money into green, that becomes the norm, and just like anything else, that becomes cheaper. Solar panel prices have dropped. Over time, the power you get out of solar panels has dropped. In between the time when we started our program, we planned for the 4-acre development, and I'll get my math wrong, but say we got 10 megawatts out of it. By the time we came back with 4 acres of stuff, we got 12 megawatts out of it just because the panels got that much better over time. I know the Water Authority is doing a new development, and now they've got solar sensors on either side. So they're getting the bounce off the ground and picking up another percentage of power from the backside. So just seeing how the technology improves as it goes along. So the intent of CCA is obviously the more money you put into these green programs, the more the green programs will move forward. They're funded, they'll get cheaper, therefore then, you know, lower the cost of green power, and hopefully fossil fuels, you know, drop off and it just doesn't become, you know, viable anymore. So that's kind of the overall intent, and these are programs you re-up every 2 or 3 years, so you're not locked into the program. If you went in at some percentage, you're not locked in for life. It's at 2 or 3 years, and then you reevaluate 2 years later, and then maybe you're at 100%, or the cost then comes down. So it's not once you're in, you're stuck at that level of percent green or that dollar figure. Any other comments, questions? Again, this doesn't have to be the speak now and forever hold your peace, but, a good conversation on this item, good conversation on all the sections tonight. Without any more comments on those, obviously, we're still working on next sections, so we'll take tonight's comments, compile our information, work on getting next sections out to you again ahead of the meetings. I think that's been working out well and getting good feedback and good conversation on those sections. So as Doug had put in the agenda and looking at, again, timing of when this room is available, when staffing's available, I think he had penciled in August 10th is the next possible evening, and then again on August 31st, if we're looking at, continuing with the 2 a month. I know we're getting into vacation season, there are people trying to use their time, but also, trying to keep the momentum going that we've built and keep moving forward. We'll send the sections out if everybody can't make every meeting. Hopefully you can provide your feedback and comments, and we'll, kind of keep trucking along. So does,
And I'll apologize, I put
31st.
31st in the agenda and 24th in the email. They're both Tuesdays and they're both available, so.
the 24th or the 31st?
I'd look at possibly doing the 24th, actually, because that would give us an additional buffer. Looking further into the future, I've been trying to partner at episodes every 2 weeks or so, just to give us some time that staff can do some edits, you guys can do review and get your comments to us. So at least for August, we're looking at the 10th and the 24th, and then possibly September 7th being the meeting after that, getting into September.
When in September, Doug?
7th.
7?
Yep.
Okay.
That way, 10, 24, and the 7th would all be 2 weeks apart.
Are you looking to start at 7 or 6 again on either one of those nights?
If 6 works for the committee,
I know the last meeting, the group voted on 6, and that worked for the group here to start at 6 o'clock. So I guess,
We can do either.
Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm out of town on the 10th, so which dogs?
okay, how does the 10th work?
I can't do the 10th.
Can't do the 10th?
I could do the 24th and the 7th.
Not good?
Do we have at least 3 or 4 for the 10th? 10th. So we've got 4 for the 10th, so I think let's pencil that one in, and again, we'll send sections out and provide your feedback. Availability on the 24th. 24th looks good, so we'll pencil that one in, and then September 7th.
I don't know.
We're just trying to reserve the room, so at least we get our name in there before somebody else jumps on it, so that's why we're kind of looking a couple ahead to make sure at least
If we
we.
can't get you, or if we can't make the meeting, we can submit our comments.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
just,
absolutely.
that's what I say.
and
Just
the
make
meetings are
sure-
recorded. If you do have time, you can always feel free to watch them. They'll be on our Facebook and YouTube and Vimeo.
So either
Usually
before,
within 48 hours.
yep, so either before, if you've got comments, put them in, we'll read them into the record and talk about them, or watch the video afterwards, and if you've got feedback as before, we'll continue the conversation and plug into them, so.
Are we gonna receive, when it's 100% final first draft to review too?
Yes.
What's the anticipation on that? Maybe Doug, not to put you in a,
I'm hoping by the early fall to have the document in a complete.
I mean, that's why we're trying to
Draft
kind
that we can
of keep
get
the
out to you
momentum
guys
going
to
in the
review.
sections,
Yeah.
and if we can keep plugging along, we'll keep plugging along, and
Got
as
you all back, we don't want to lose you.
quick as we get through it, we'll get through it, but obviously,
Another pandemic.
give it the time that it takes, and don't want to, don't want to rush it either, but want to keep the momentum going. So we'll, for now, we'll say we'll pencil in the 10th, the 31st, and the 7th, so at least we'll lock down this room for those dates, and then as we track each meeting, make sure that still works. So, I'm sorry, the 10th, the 24th.
24th, yeah.
24th, and then the 7th. Okay.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
So with that, we will close out the July 22nd meeting at 8:03 PM. Thanks, everybody.